In this lecture, we are going to continue working on the function for handling the registration. Before we can register the user, we should check if the request was valid. The request should come with the username, email, and password. Without these details, WordPress will not be able to create a user. It's our job to check if this information is available. Let's get started. In the editor, open the signup.php file. Data sent with a request is accessible via an argument. Inside the function's argument list, add an argument called request. This argument is an object with various properties and methods related to a request. In the resource section of this lecture, I provide a link to a class called WP REST Request. WordPress defines dozens of classes. The WP REST Request class will act as a wrapper around the data of our request. We can access various pieces of information through this class. The request argument will be an instance of this class. You can look through the methods for the various actions that can be performed. Let's head back to our editors. WordPress will refer to the data as parameters. Let's create a variable for storing the request called params. The value for this variable will be the request get JSON params function. There are various ways to send data to an endpoint. This class supports various approaches. For this course, we are going to be sending the form data as JSON. If we send JSON data to an endpoint, we can retrieve the data with the getJSON params function. WordPress will convert the JSON data into an array. For demonstration purposes, let's return this variable. If we did everything right, we should receive the same data sent by us. Open the Postman application. We are going to update the request by sending data. Originally, we've been sending data via query parameters. This time, we are going to send data via the body of the request. In HTML, we have two sections of a document. There are the head and body sections. Both play different roles. The head section contains useful information on the page, such as the title, styles, and meta tags. The information inserted into the head section of the document is not rendered on the page. The purpose of this section is to help the browser understand the page. The body section serves as the main content area of the page. If we insert text or images, this content will be presented to visitors. This idea of separating information can be translated to requests and responses in HTTP. A request or a response can have a header. The header can contain various pieces of information such as the IP, browser, or method. The body can contain the data of a response or request. This information is meant for the browser or server to process. In our PHP file, the getJSON params function will search for the data from the body. Therefore, we must initiate our request with the data stored in the request's body. Postman allows us to send data through the body. There's a tab called Body. Under this tab, we can send data in various formats. JSON data can be sent by selecting the Raw option. After selecting this option, we can specify the type of data to send. Let's configure the data type to JSON. Below the options, we can start writing JSON. The code written inside this box will be sent to our endpoint. Let's add an object with the following properties: email, username, password. Each property will have a random value. Next, let's initiate the request. After a few moments, the server should respond with the same parameters. This response indicates that WordPress was able to successfully grab the data from the body. We can proceed to process the request. However, what if we don't include this data? We should check that the body contains everything that we need for registering a user. Let's head back to the editor. The return statement can be replaced with a conditional statement. Inside the conditional statement, we are going to add the isSet function. The isSet function is defined by PHP. It'll check if a variable has been created. This includes array keys and object properties. If a key exists within an array, this function will return true. Our goal is to check if the data does not exist with the params array. Let's add the not operator. If this function returns false, we should stop the function from processing the rest of the request. Inside the conditional statement, let's return the response variable. This function has an unlimited number of arguments. We can pass in a list of variables to check. The getJSONParams function returns an array. The data from the request will be stored as items in the array by their names. Let's pass in the following: params email, params username, params password. If any of these keys aren't present in the response, the isSet function will return false, thus causing the response to be returned by our function. We're not finished yet. We're checking if the items in the array have been created. However, this function will not check if the value is empty. Empty values can be a huge problem. WordPress will reject our attempts to create a new user if the request has empty data. After the isSet function, let's add the OR operator. The OR operator is written with 2 pipe characters. This operator will allow us to write multiple conditions. It's very similar to the AND operator. The main difference is that only a single condition has to be true. With the AND operator, all conditions had to be true, whereas the OR operator will allow either condition to be true. After the OR operator, add a function called empty. The empty function is defined by PHP. It'll check if a variable has an empty value. Let's pass in the params email key. Unlike the isSet function, the empty function can only check one variable. In this example, we are checking if the email key has a value. If it doesn't, this function will return true. It'll cause our script to return the response variable. Let's add another OR operator. This time, we are going to check the params username key with the empty function. Let's add this operator one more time. The last condition should be the empty function with the params password key. Overall, the conditions will check if the request has the appropriate data. In addition, the request will be denied if the request has empty values. I always recommend taking the time to validate data before inserting it into the database. Another thing worth noting is the formatting. Technically, we could write this condition in a single line. However, I like to write one condition per line for readability. Feel free to format this conditional statement. Let's try testing our function. Head back to Postman. In our first test, let's try checking a rejected request by removing the password property from the body. After removing this property, let's initiate the request. The function will return a response with a status of 1. This status indicates that the request has been rejected. Let's add the password property to the body. Next, let's send the request. This time, the status has been set to 2. That's perfect. It's exactly the behavior we were looking for. We've successfully validated the data. We're guaranteed that our data will have values before inserting them into the database. In the next lecture, we're going to continue working on the function.